French cheese wine, unique Cristiani. Into the vino. Sarah, welcome. Wine families. Antonio, how are you?
Oh,
Antonio, how
hi.
are you?
All right. How are you?
Let me see. Let me get my volume up here a bit. All right. How you doing?
I'm all right. I've got a map of Etna behind me for you.
Wonderful. I was gonna ask you about that. That's one of my pet peeves about. But you guys are making a lot of progress on that front, right?
Yeah, we're making some. We're
Yeah.
making some. Tell you about it. Sure. We need.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, how are things going there in the lockdown? How are you making out?
Well, we are getting used to it, but hopefully it will not last too long. Next week on Monday, we'll be in phase two, which means there will be a little bit more freedom to move around and do a few things. We still go to the vineyards. We'll still try to lead interesting life,
Yeah.
but we miss the life we had before. So
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah.
it will be over soon.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, you look wonderful, none the worse for wear. Still, as handsome as ever. So, keep it up. So, I'm going to launch in. I want to start looking at the dialogue, looking at the work that your dad did to bring the winery, get it up and running. Then want to look at what you and Salvino did, and then talk about some of the key trends and issues of that type. So, beginning. In that fashion, what was your dad's experience in wine prior to launching this enterprise?
Well, Keith, well, first let me thank you for inviting me to your new program.
Thank
I'm friendly. You are an opinion leader. I'm happy to be on board.
thank you.
So, well, my father had a direct experience in that he was drinking a lot of wine because of his many travels.
Yeah.
So he had exposure to the great wine regions and the great wines. But also, besides that, our family has always had vineyards. So my father, until he was around 10, he had, he had taken part in harvests with his grandfather and always been in love with our region of Mount Etna. My father historically is a pharmacist. And when the time came in the mid 80s, in his what used to be his main business in pharmaceuticals, he decided not to move, not to build a plant in the north of Italy, but actually to invest here locally. He's always been a local that wanted to invest locally. When he was about my age, when he was 43, um, he decided to do something that was more fun than pharmaceuticals, something a bit less dry, something more social. and something that was related to the territory and the place where he was born.
Mm-hmm.
So wine was his passion, and he's also is a very brilliant entrepreneur. He saw an opportunity there, and he decided to explore it.
Mm-hmm.
So 1988 is when this happened.
And so, what exactly did he do? What was it? What were his objectives, and what did he do to implement those objectives?
Well, my father is driven by passion, so sure he was not thinking about gaining or like earning anything. Maybe a place or a role in the history of wine in the region. So the objective was mostly a quality one.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, in the late 80s, there were very few examples of proper wineries on Mount Etna. I would say that there were maybe three. Barone di Villagrande, Cantine Russo, and Murgo. And many of those that were making wine were doing so in a very amatorial way with their own little palmento and making wine for themselves, or wine that would be made to be sold in bulk and sent somewhere else. So my father said, well, I would like to aim higher. I would like to really see what one can do quality-wise with the indigenous varieties of wine. And what he had in mind was a wine that would also last through time, so age well and find some room and some consideration in the community of wine lovers and wine connoisseurs. So it was quite a greenfield work. We did have vineyards, but my father also sampled grapes from small growers' vineyards around Etna and conducted 150 micro vinifications in a cellar that he set up for this purpose. So it's very thorough. And after 2 years of experiments, the first vintage we bottled was 1990. So at the beginning, it was a qualitative objective, and it was also, I guess, the find a lifetime project for the second life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And during that time, where were you guys, yourself and your brother? Were you a part of that in any way, or were you?
1988, my brother and I were about to embark on a 15 years long academic and then work experience abroad. We were 14. I have a twin brother, Salvino, that you know. At the age of 14, we were just finishing the very early years of high school. And at the end of that specific year, my father sent us to study and then live abroad. And we came back here in the mid-2000s. So we were away, and we've been seeing the very early years, and I would say the first 15, 16 years of this venture, mostly from the outside. But when we were coming home for midterm breaks or vacations, once we entered the working life, we saw that this was really developing. So while even before joining the winery, we both took these sommelier courses with the Italian Sommelier Association and the wine trips. But at that time, we were not seeing this as a lifetime project. It seemed to be more like my father's dream, but gradually it did become a real venture, very promising and very, with a number of awards and a number of successes in a number of countries. So that was, we started to pick our brains, and gradually towards the 2011, 2012, we also decided to embark on this project and make it our own lifetime dream.
So tell me about that process, because you guys were jet setting through Europe, skiing in the Swiss Alps, walking the boulevards of Paris, etc. And now you're going to you're going to come home to Sicily. and become winemakers. You know, did you have to convince your dad to allow that to happen, or is this something that he encouraged you guys to do? How did that work?
Very, very sharp question. Well, Keith, when you are in your 20s or even early 30s, you don't really see Sicily as a place where you want to spend the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So, having spent so many years in cities like London, like Geneva, like Paris, like Madrid, like Mexico City, was very formative uh, for ourselves in terms of our own personal development.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of work we were doing, my brother and myself, was mostly in finance and then pharmaceuticals. Uh, I think it's quite normal when you want to try yourself in these kind of fields, because I have an MBA as well, and at that time wine seemed to be um, like a plan B. I'll be really honest.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you approach, as you grow a little older, you start to, I think, arrange your priorities differently, and the feeling of being home and the feeling of doing something for your own region and something that is related to a place, something that tells about a territory, uh, eventually got the better of us. And, my father was very glad to get some help. With a team in place, our winery has had the same staff for more than 20 years. So there was a lot of in-house real skills that we could leverage on.
Mm-hmm.
But given that we are, very social and well educated and very enthusiastic, we felt we could, injecting new blood was going to help. We had our own ideas. We've been making some changes. We brought about changes, uh, and I'm happy to say that since we joined, every year has been better than the previous one, and 2019 was the best year ever. So it seems like we are on the right track.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you guys came in. You had MBAs. You had culture that was different to Sicilian culture. You made a number of changes in the winery operations. Your father had put together a fairly significant enterprise with tentacles that stretched across outside of the Etna area. When you came on board, and you guys came on board, you changed some of the operational procedures. Talk to me about the things that you did. And what was it in either the Etna environment or the broader environment that drove some of the decisions that you took?
Okay. Well, sometimes, Keith, when you look at something from the outside, um, you can spot some things that can be improved because you're not part of them, and you can approach it again from the outside. We felt um, very solid given the work that had been done for, again, 2 years. And we really wanted to keep that. We really understood.
No. Uh, uh, no song from the Benanti side. Uh, Antonio? Yeah, Antonio. The song disappeared there. I think too many people might be in their homes around the world. You know.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I think you heard me until I was mentioning we had two enologists in 32 years. Did you
Yeah.
hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So we decided to maintain a style continuity and team continuity, of course. We did divest some vineyards and we invested in other vineyards in some locations like Milo on the eastern slope. That has always been very important for us. So we expanded there and also in the area of Rovitello in the north. Uh, we decided to travel more and we broadened the network of exporters. We currently cover close to 60 markets. So I guess we multiplied those by 4 or 5 in 6, 7 years. We decided to improve and foster significantly the wine tourism as well. And last year we received 9,000 guests. So it's been very, very much a big success. And then again, we really spent a lot of time telling the story, developing contacts. We, for example, Keith, you might remember we met in Bulgaria
Mm-hmm.
in Plovdiv in 2015.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
more contacts and getting to know the journalists and the opinion leaders and the wine writers. And again, it's been a success so far.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So tell me about the you guys coming up to speed in terms of Etna as a wine producing area, and yourselves as winery principals. By the way, what are the roles and responsibilities of the relatives today, and then what's the team that you have working with you?
Uh, the winery is 100% run by my brother and myself.
Mhm.
Actually, myself and my brother. um, my father has a sort of honorary role. He's sort of more diplomatic role, but he has entrusted 100% responsibility to us. 7 years ago, we are the current owners of the winery as well. Yeah, I'm the guy in the middle, and then my father, obviously the guy with white hair, and
Yeah.
my brother at the far left.
Right.
We have a team. We have Agatino Failla. He's our export manager, whom I think you know.
Yeah.
He's been with 2011. We have Bianca Conversi. She's a distant cousin, and she looks after wine tourism and everything we do at our estate. And again, we have a team in place of people that have been there for more than 20 years. I am formally the administrator of the winery, so I do a lot of things myself. But of course, it's a teamwork. So we are, I think, very fortunate to have skills, people with skills, people that know what they're doing, enthusiastic, passionate people. So Enzo Cali looks after all the technical aspects, vineyards and cellar. Uh, Agatino Failla is in charge of marketing and sales. My brother and myself, we oversee everything. And I would say there's a very good, it's a very good workplace.
Mm-hmm.
People really enjoy spending time with us. And it's a big achievement. We're very happy to have a happy team in place. Happy team delivers very good results.
Wonderful. Now, I noticed, I see a lot of pictures with the three of you guys, kind of alike. So I was wondering if you guys punishing your dad now by making him.
So, Keith, I've lost a bit of what you said because the audio again is coming and going. So I missed your question. Could you ask that again, please?
Yeah. It was a slight attempt at humor. I was remarking about the fact that you guys are dressed alike in a lot of the pictures that I see, and whether that was punishment for your dad to dressing you guys alike as youngsters. Yeah.
Because we are twins, when we were small, I was always being dressed in blue and my brother was wearing red. In this specific photo that you're showing up there, the photographer, Armando Rotoletti, who wrote a very nice book on Mount Etna, photo book, he said he wanted us to look like berries of Nerello Mascalese. So shirts. Those shirts were actually bought for that specific photo, and they've never been used again.
Wow. They're in a museum someplace. So,
Yeah.
What makes Mount Etna the great place that it is, in your opinion, to grow grapes and to make wine? What are the characteristics of the place that make it such a wonderful environment in which to grow wine?
Well, I think there are a few objective reasons. One of them is the very unique combination of the high elevation at a Mediterranean latitude. So we have a diurnal range, temperature excursion that is very, very favorable for grapes, for ripening, also for the concentration of aromas and flavors. It's also a place with volcanic soil, so great drainage, and vines are always very densely planted. These are quite poor soils where you really don't want the vines to grow too much. So it's also a lot of expertise in the land of people with this short pruning and quality-driven mindset. But I would say climate, soil, and also the proximity to the sea and the ventilation. Even though it does rain on Etna, the wind then washes off any residual rain. There is very low risk of fungal diseases. 80% of the growers on Etna practice organic farming, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the climate, the soil, and also I would say the culture that has developed here on boutique, and nobody is tempted to do. Okay, back in.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. This is unusual. All right, so you were talking about the characteristics of the environment.
Yes, so let me just recap. Why is it a special place?
Yeah.
Well, um, a lot of sunshine, grapes ripen well. It's a Mediterranean latitude. We also have a lot of ventilation. It's very windy, so even though it does rain, vineyards stay dry and healthy. So very low need for treatments, and also the volcanic soil that drains. So sunshine, ventilation, volcanic soil. And also, we have this unique combination of elevation at a Mediterranean latitude. So it's a diurnal range, temperature excursion. And last but not least, a very special indigenous varieties that we grow on Mount Etna. They're not only indigenous, so very rare, but I think they are also objectively grapes with a very high potential for using great wines and for aging as well.
Right. So, Nerello Mascalese, Cuccio, Caricanti, etc. Could you tell me a little bit about the characteristics of those varieties as you see them, the things that make them extremely well suited to the area in which they're grown?
Of course. So, Keith, one thing first, just to give you a picture of the share of like the breakdown of the different types of wine made on Etna. About 1/3 of the wine, the Etna DOC wines made in 2019 were white wines, Carricante based, of course, and 2/3 were Etna Rosso. This is, again, these are the big figures, but also you have growing incidence of Rosato, the rosé from Etna, and also some sparkling wines, and a tiny, tiny contribution of Etna Bianco Superiore and Etna Rosso Riserva. So what I'm saying is that Etna is still today, mostly for at least 2/3, a red wine region. So Bello Mascalese is the most widely planted variety, and then Carricante. Now, these grapes are fairly neutral, all of them. They are not, fruitiness is not what they're known for. They're very, very refined. They always deliver very high acidity. Nerello Mascalese is very pale and rather tannic. So, and very, so these polyphenols also help the variety to, given a long maceration, to age well. Uh, Carricante, of course, is mostly vinified without any skin contact. So its age worthiness is mostly driven by its high acidity, which sometimes is close to 8 grams of tartaric acid, which is very high. So these are all wines that start a little shy. You can find in all these wines and the grapes from Etna this sort of ashes and earthiness. The way an Etna wine tastes is not only the result of the fruit itself, but the place where it's grown. So across any Etna wine, be it white or rosé or red, you will find some common features like this high acidity, the salinity, the elegance, the medium bodied, the earthiness that are common to all Etna wines. And it's all due to where the grapes are grown. So if you planted Carricante or Nerello Mascalese outside the Etna region at a different elevation, without any volcanic soil, without our diurnal range, you will not get Etna wines. I know I'm saying something obvious, but the place here is just as important as the grapes themselves. And they ripen late. They're all late ripening varieties, and we harvest in October, as you know very well because you came here more than once.
Yeah.
So these are mountain wines that would do well in other mountain climates, but they're not meant to be planted in very, very warm wine regions where they would lose some of the elegance and precision and lightweight that make them nice.
So talk a little bit about the Etna as a region, the Etna dock, and a little bit about the map behind you, and if you can fit in some dialogue there about the concept of contrada while you're at it.
Okay, so Keith, one thing about Etna, I usually say this when I talk about the region, as you know, because you've spoken to countless producers. Every one of us will always claim that we make wine in a special place. That's very common. It's true. Wine is usually made in beautiful places, but Etna objectively is unique. I cannot think of other areas with active volcano, with so many old vines, in some cases ungrafted Prephyloxera vines that have been surviving for so long, and with such diversity depending on where you are. So before talking about what contrade are, well, Etna is one of those places in the world where it does make sense to fragment the surface in many subregions and contrade, because I will explain now why and how every different spot on Etna is different. When you think of a wine region, in order to define, you always want to start by talking climate, the average temperature, the rainfall rate, the type of soil, the ventilation. Well, on Etna, depending on where you are, all of these variables will be different. Because it's a mountain, we have slopes, so we have different aspects. The aspect will have a huge influence on the luminosity, so the intensity of sunlight, and the duration of the sun exposure. The proximity to the sea will determine whether you have an influence from rainfall rate, which in some areas is higher than another place on Etna. The ventilation is different. We have winds from the south, even from Africa, others from the north, but there's a barrier with the Nebrodi Mountains and the Peloritani Mountains. So ventilation is very different. There can be a gap of more than 2,000 feet in terms of elevation, and you will still be within the appellation Etna, of volcanic soil on Etna, lava flows that have been repeating and then blending in with existing soils. And so soils have different depths, different composition, different structure. Now, when all these variables are so objectively different, then one cannot really just talk about one Etna, but you must go further, deeper in the analysis and discuss the actual slopes of Etna, and then within slopes, the contrade that make up the different villages on those slopes. So Etna has basically 4 subregions: the southwest, the southeast, the eastern slope, and the north. The common belief is that the northern part of Etna gives rise to outstanding wines based on Nerello Mascalese. If you look back at what Etna has always produced, the north of Etna and prevalence of Nerello Mascalese. It's a cooler climate where ripening is tougher, and Nerello Mascalese is the one variety of Etna that adapts the most to the extreme conditions and can ripen well on that side of Etna, even though some good results Carricante have shown lately. The eastern slope of Etna, mostly Milo, Sant'Alfio, is really the home of Carricante. Very well ventilated, great luminosity, more windy than other areas. So it's a cool climate, but it's very illuminated and very well ventilated, which is a fragile variety, keeping a very fresh and mineral profile. The south of Etna has easier. The 3 varieties are planted, and there are wines from Carricante, Nerello Mascalese, and Nerello Cappuccio coming from the south. So the north and the east they're somewhat specialized either in Nerello Mascalese up north or Carricante on the eastern slope, whereas the south is less specialized and the three varieties are planted. Contrade is not a term that was coined for Etna. Actually, it's an Italian term that is meant to, it's used to segment rural areas or even areas that used to be rural and are no longer rural. On Etna, I would define a contrada as an area, regardless of its size, where a number of variables are common. Certainly the rainfall rate, certainly the aspect, and therefore the luminosity. Sometimes contrade can be split by a narrow little road.
Yeah, all right. It seems like every time you're right in the crux of really important stuff, the sun gods step in. So you were saying that a contrada can be separated by just as much as a little road or something like that, please.
Yes, so it's very difficult to define a contrada because there are some very large ones where there some of the variables might differ to some extent within the same contrada, and then there are other very small contrade, one adjacent to the other, that can be quite similar. So what we are doing in the Consorzio, because as you wrote in the introduction, currently I am the president of the Etna DOC Consortium, we are working on studying the different soil types and defining the exact boundaries of the Etna appellation in a very specific way, and then we will release a new proper map, because that will help us to communicate Etna. It will help you. It will help all those involved, all those that are keen on Etna, to understand Etna better. So in the Etna DOC Consortium, we are working on these things to make the definition of contrade and the definition of Etna more and more specific, more and more facts-based, more and more objective.
And what's the time frame on that?
The time frame has been slowed down by this COVID-19.
Yeah.
But we had already planned it, and we have discussed it in the consortium. We discussed it with the members of the Consorzio. I would say about a year and a half from now.
Okay. Antonio, if you can talk a little bit about this is a map I made of your winery holdings. I don't know if it's still valid. So if you can talk a little bit about the Benanti grape sources. One of my understandings is that you've changed the source of your Pietra Marina grapes. I don't know if that's accurate. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, we've made a few changes through the years. You know, when you have a history of 32 years, I'm seeing some friends of mine that are joining, like ciao Sandro, hi Sandro. What I think defines what we do is a presence on the four slopes of Etna. Back then, before the urbanization, before a number of things that happened over the previous century, the whole of Etna was equally planted with vineyards. And like I said, I don't think there is a better or like a premium or less premium corner of Etna. It just gives rise to very different wines that can be equally wonderful. So we felt since the very beginning that a presence on more than one slope really makes a lot of sense and helps you to really tell the Etna story and show the diversity of Etna better than if you were located on just one spot.
Mm-hmm.
So we started in the north, in Rovitello, in 1988. And actually, at the very beginning, the name of the winery was Tenuta di Castiglione. Just a few months later, my father also started to strike some agreements with small growers in Milo on the eastern slope. In the mid-90s, we built a presence in the southwest, Contrada Cavaliere, which is the highest point within the appellation area elevation-wise. And also in 1998, the southeast in Contrada Monteserra. We have divested in the meantime some properties we had in Verzella. So that's what we did. Our Rovitello comes from the north of Etna. Pietramarina comes from Milo. It's a Bianco Superiore. Through the years, we've been sourcing the grapes mostly from Contrada Rinazzo and from Contrada Caselle, which are the two highest contrade within Milo. And gradually we're moving towards a 100% Contrada Rinazzo specific wine. And just as a reminder, Pietramarina and Rovitello are the two longest standing wines we've made, given that the first vintage was 1990. We are today, as to my knowledge, the only winery on Etna with vineyards on the 4 different slopes. So, because before talking about Contrade, I think it's really worth discussing the different slopes of Etna and then Contrade within a slope. So wonderfully varied and complex that I think all the different slopes of Etna deserve to be in the spotlight, and then wines speak for themselves.
Let's talk a little bit about the grapes, for example, then, or the wines from you're saying that they're specialized in the north and in the east, and in the southwest, it's a little more generalized.
Yes.
So if we look at the Caricanti, for example, what's the difference in characteristic from a Caricanti that's grown on the eastern slope versus one that's grown in the southwest, for example?
Okay, well, the areas are very different, and the way the wine tastes is a function of that. So people on Etna, I would say there's a consensus, and maybe those that are, I mean, I'm not saying everybody has to agree, but the area of Milo and the area, so on the eastern slope, and the area which also can claim the Superiore appellation, or the southwestern area, which is Biancavilla and Santa Maria di Licodia, they have built a reputation through hundreds of years for as premium areas of Carricante. The southwest of Etna, you can grow it at even higher elevation, and it's the least rainy corner of Etna, and one with the highest diurnal range. So wine Carricante grown there tends to be slightly higher in alcohol. It tends to be a little bit more expressive in terms of fruit, slightly lower in acidity, and somewhat readier by the time it's released. It's a stronger, darker Carricante. On the eastern slope, we grow it at a very similar elevation. It's about 2,600 feet, so it's 800 meters. So it's still very high, but it's the most rainy part of Etna. 3 to even 5 times more wet than the southwest. So it's a cooler environment with a slightly lower diurnal range, uh, a lot of influence of maritime influence and all these saline particles carried by the wind. The wine tends to be more saline with higher acidity and more elegant and age-worthy. So I would say Milo is more about the finesse and the salinity and the high acidity, a little bit more of a shy wine that, however, ages longer. It needs a lot of lees contact, whereas the Southwest, reddier, more expressive, the fruit is more distinct, and wines that are maybe somewhat more rewarding in the short term,
Mm-hmm.
very to the territory where they come from. So maybe a little bit more potency and readiness compared to the East. So they're very different, and it's nice to taste that. I want to show you one thing, Keith.
Yeah.
So a little bit some advertising. So this is a new wine we are just about to release. Contrada
Wow.
Rinazzo, younger vines from the Milo vineyard, Bianco Superiore. Bianco Superiore, and 2018 is the first vintage.
Okay. Oh no, not again. Dear God, I've lost you again. Ah. Ah. I the yes. Let's try it again. Hi, Etna Wine School. Hi, Sarah May. Not too bad. Not too bad. Yeah, sweating under the thingy here, but other than that, fine. Okay, now for segment 4 of our 4-part series. All right, so yeah, you're in the middle of talking about that new introduction, the new wine, and if you can talk about that, it's from Younger Vines. If you can talk about it in the context of one of the great white wines of the world, the Pietra Marina.
Okay.
So that
Well,
that is going to be released. You said this year.
well, it's been bottled in January and it's meant to be released in June.
Okay.
So we only produced 2,000 bottles of this first vintage.
Okay.
And the wine mostly comes from younger vines, still Alberello, so head-trained bush vines, um, slightly higher yield and 12 months on the fine lees, whereas Pietra Marina has older vines, lower yields, and 2 years on the lease. So it's meant to be like a little Pietra Marina. It's still a Bianco Superiore. It will become very important, and the vineyard. So this will be released in June this year. So in a couple of months. Like I said, this COVID-19 is slowing things down, and we
Yeah.
will add first vintage because we only have 2,000 bottles. I'll
Yeah.
make sure one for you.
Wonderful. Keep that. Yeah. So now, what happens when, as those wines become older and they graduate up into Pietra Marina classes? Yeah. So is this like a short-term wine, or?
No, well, the vineyard has, we have grown in that area in the last few years, and now there's a thing of about 7 hectares. So there's plenty of, there's a future for this wine. It's here to stay, and so we're making two Bianco Superiore
Yeah.
from area of Milo,
Yeah.
different parts of the same vineyard.
Okay.
And again, Marina will be released a year later. So my idea is to release Pietra Marina with 5 years on the label. Currently, we release it after 4 years, but it will be 5 years. Be already from the 2017 vintage. So the vintage in the market is 2016, and we're thinking of waiting for 2022 to release the 2017 vintage. So there will be a gap of 3 years between these two.
Tell me, what are the major differences between, what are the major vintage differentials? What causes differences between vintages? And if you can talk about some of the, the high quality vintages that you've had, let's say, over the last 5 years, both white and red.
Sure. I'm sure you know the answer because you're a true Etna expert, but I'll still answer.
This is for our audience.
Yeah, sure. We have experienced, and I'm sure you've heard this from a number of growers from Etna, in the last few years, quite a erratic, shall we say, non-trend, in that we went from two very warm vintages like 2012 and 2017, then some vintages with some lack of the usual sunshine like 2019, 2018. So 2015 was very balanced, but then we had some rain as well. 2014 and 2011 are considered by many as being benchmark vintages. So, ciao Marco. I would say, if you look at Etna, look for 2011, very balanced vintage in terms of climate, the right amount of sunshine, rainfall, temperature was just ideal, by the book vintage. 2014, considered very premium, mostly for red wine from Etna. And that is reflected in the actual ratings that all the Etna Rosso from 2014 have received by major writers. And I would include 2016, which I think is the third benchmark vintage from the last decade. So 11, 14, 16. So I really like our 2014 reds as well as our 2016 reds. I'm very fond of the 2011 and 2015 vintage of Pietra Marina, for example, whereas Nerello Cappuccio, which is a very, very delicate and somewhat fragile variety, which can give rise to somewhat greenish wines, needs the warmest vintages. So 2012 and 2017, or looking back 2003, now the warmest vintages are those that usually give rise to the best expression of Nerello Cappuccio. So I hope that answers your question. Etna has been very, very erratic in the last years.
Okay. So what are some of the key issues and trends that you see at two levels? Number one, for Mt Etna as a whole, for Mt Etna wines, and then what are some of the new products and new practices that you see for Benanti specifically?
Okay, so looking at the figures from Etna, something that is really striking, if you look at the production breakdown from, say, 6 or 7 years ago, and what we produced as a whole region, so the aggregate of every producer and every DOC, Etna DOC producer on Etna in 2019, the share of white wines has really grown from 11-12% of the entire bottlings from Etna to about 28-29.
Wow.
So currently, that's why I said that about a third of the wines from Etna are white. So definitely the growth and the higher incidence of white wines on Etna is a trend. The other thing is the growth of the rosé, rosato. I know it's not only an Etna trend, but I think that besides sweet wines, nothing on Etna is too daring. So the growth of sparkling wines or rosati or rosé wines or the growth of white, of course, has been eating up a bit of the share of the Etna Rosso. But that is normal because, like I said at the beginning, unlike other regions, Mount Etna can really give rise to outstanding wines of several different types. And I know you've tried whites. Some people can be torn on what's best from Etna. Is it white wines based on Carricante or Etna Rosso? Some people say we are in the elite of rosé wines now. If you try a sparkling wine from Etna, Metodo Classico, so traditional method, you'll be impressed as well. So we are just, I would say, adjusting to the potential of the volcano. Traditionally, Etna has mostly been red, even though a number of vineyards were co-planted, but always with a huge majority of Nerello Mascalese. And now it's sort of become more balanced. And I think it will settle somewhere around 60% Mascalese and then 30-ish% Carricante, so Etna Rosso, Etna Bianco, and then some Rosato and sparkling.
Yeah.
We are not doing much. We are keeping our style that it's always been. We don't really make many changes. What we are doing since the 2010 vintage, we are using our own yeasts. We have selected yeast with a 5-year-long study from our own vineyards. I'm happy to send you the paper. It's a 10 pages document. So that's something we have changed throughout the years. We are moving to larger and larger oak. And we might experiment with cement, concrete, in the years to come. But I would say that our wines are always highly recognizable. They have their own identity, and we don't really like to diverge from that. We have a style, and that's what we like to keep.
Yeah. So we have a question from Gareth, and I think the answer is no. He's asking, is the growth in white all native grapes, or are there some international grapes?
Okay. Well, first, hi, Gareth. I know Gareth. Happy to say hi. So, in order for a wine to be certified as Etna, it must be based on Carricante. The only other variety you can use in the blend in meaningful percentages, but still below 40%, is Catarratto, and some other non-aromatic Sicilian varieties like Minella, Bianca, Insoli, and so forth. But nobody is planting any international variety. And I would say that so Carricante is the variety that is being planted.
And you know where I come down on that. I think that Pietramarina is one of the great white wines on the planet. It stands second to no white grape in my perspective. Also, the Rosato that we tasted a couple of years ago at Contrada, which knocked my socks off. That was excellent. That was excellent wine. It brought you guys from no place in the Rosato world to being among the best producers on Etna in that zone. Now, did I hear that you guys are producing a sparkling wine? Oops.
I missed your question because I got cut off.
Yeah. So yeah, what I was saying is, did I hear that you guys were either doing a sparkling or you were thinking of doing a sparkling?
Yeah, we've been making a sparkling wine since 2002.
Okay.
It's a carricante traditional method, il metodo classico.
Yeah.
Somebody's saying unreliable Sicilian Wi-Fi.
I wasn't gonna say anything about that. Yeah.
So my father decided almost 20 years ago to produce the very first traditional method sparkling wine made from carricante, and maybe there are three or four. So most of the sparkling wine on Etna is made from Nerello Mascalese, which contain the appellation Etna, whereas carricante is an IGT when it comes to sparkling wines. It's a more of a regional appellation. But we make 3,000 bottles, and it's called Noblesse.
Okay. All right. Well, Antonio, thank you. We did this in sections, but but I think we got the full story. Anything else that you would like to share with the listeners before you left that didn't come out that you would wanted to get out?
I think I will have dinner very soon.
Excellent.
So I will have to say goodbye, but I've really enjoyed the very in-depth conversation, Keith. I'm glad to be in your circle of friends. I send you a big hug, and I say, great goodbye and hugs to all those that joined us.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Antonio.
Okay.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye.